Politeness has become one of those unquestioned virtues of our age. I think from childhood we're taught to say please and thank you and to smile, to never interrupt, to keep the peace with this gentle tone. And in many ways, I think this isn't bad, it's good. Politeness, it greases the wheels of social interaction. It allows us to navigate daily life without this constant friction. It helps us respect strangers and honor elders and move through society with this degree of civility. But like every virtue we've been covering this month, I think politeness has a shadow as well. See, politeness can also become a mask. It can become the way that we avoid discomfort and dodge truth and settle for connection that looks smooth but feels hollow and shallow. When manners replace meaning, I think relationships lose their substance. And we become experts in these surface level interactions while underneath we're starving for intimacy. Now, the cost of this isn't always obvious. On the outside, I think polite people are usually praised, right? They're seen as agreeable and easygoing and mature. But on the inside, something essential can be lost, I think. The habit of being nice it'll become so automatic that we forget how to be real. We lose courage to say what we actually think, to risk offense for the sake of honesty, to let people see the unpolished parts of who we are. And without that courage, I don't think there can be any intimacy. Intimacy, I think, really depends on risk. It requires that I let you see not only the parts of me that know how to smile and nod, but also the part of me that struggles, the part of me that wrestles with anger or doubt or fear. If all you ever encounter is my politeness, then you're not really encountering me. You're more so encountering the performance or this curated version of myself that prioritizes smoothness over truth. See, integrity demands more than that, though. Integrity demands that my words align with my values, even if this creates tension. It demands that I speak the truth, not just the pleasantries, but the truth as well. And it demands that I choose meaning over manners when these two are in conflict. Because without integrity, politeness is really just another way of lying. Now, I've had moments in my life when I've hidden behind manners, though. When I smiled and nodded at things I didn't really agree with, right? When I said it's fine, even though it wasn't fine. When I swallowed my frustration just to keep the peace. And I told myself that I was being mature, that I was practicing restraint. But deep down, I knew the truth. I really wasn't being mature. I was being afraid. Afraid of rejection, afraid of conflict, afraid of being seen as difficult. And so I covered all this with the fear that was masked as politeness. But fear dressed up in politeness is still fear, though, isn't it? And when fear governs our communication, intimacy dies. Because intimacy requires truth. And without truth, that bridge between two people may look stable, but it can't hold weight. Sooner or later, the weight of dishonesty is going to break that, right? Now, politeness without meaning, it doesn't really build trust. In fact, I would say it erodes it. People can sense when our words don't really match our hearts. And they may not always be able to name it, but they feel it. They sense the distance, the hollowness, the lack of substance. And they walk away from the interaction with something missing. Now, that's the feeling of truly being connected. Now, this doesn't mean that politeness has no place, right? Courtesy matters and respect matters, tone matters, but they can't come at the expense of authenticity. True respect is rooted in truth. True maturity is able to combine kindness with honesty, and true connection requires that we bring our real selves, not just these polite versions of ourselves to the table. For young men specifically, this is such a critical lesson. I think many of us were taught to either erupt in anger or retreat in silence. And politeness offered this middle path. But too often this became an escape, right? Instead of learning to tell the truth with courage and compassion, we learn to hide behind these social graces. And in doing so, we traded intimacy for applause. And the challenge and an invitation is to rediscover the form of communication that is both of these, like both honest and humane. One where politeness supports meaning rather than replacing it. One where manners are the frame and not just the painting. Because what this world desperately needs, I would say, isn't just more polite people. It needs people of integrity, people who can speak the truth in love, people who actually choose meaning over performance. And one of the reasons I would say that politeness becomes such a trap is that it earns constant praise, right? From classrooms to workplaces, polite people are often rewarded. Teachers describe them as well-behaved. Employers, they call them professional, right? And friends see them as dependable. And in many ways, those things can be true. But there's a subtle danger here, though. When politeness becomes our identity, we in essence begin to equate being liked with being real. And that's when the cracks start to form. Because deep down, we know the difference between being appreciated for our honesty and being praised for our compliance. See, honesty builds respect, even when it's uncomfortable. Whereas compliance, it builds approval, but at the expense of your integrity. And over time, living for the approval of others leaves us hollow. We end up crafting interactions that are smooth but shallow, right? Conversations where both people smile, but they don't really feel truly seen. And it's in those spaces that disconnection really thrives, because disconnection, it doesn't always look like silence or hostility. Sometimes disconnection looks like this endless stream of politeness. The polite colleague who never raises concerns, right? The polite friend who never says how they actually feel. The polite partner who just swallows the frustration to avoid the conflict. And on the surface, everything looks calm. Underneath, though, the relationship is starving for authenticity. And resentment, I think, resentment grows in these silences. And resentment, like I said in the past episodes, is a signal. It's a sign that we've sacrificed too much meaning for the sake of manners. And we begin to notice in small ways that irritation after yet another, it's fine, right? When it wasn't. The heaviness of never being known beyond our smiles. The pain of realizing that everyone sees us as kind, but no one actually knows what's really going on the inside. And the tragedy is politeness in these moments doesn't just disconnect us from others, it ultimately disconnects us from ourselves. Every time that we choose to hide behind manners, we're sending ourselves this message, and that is that your truth is not welcome here. Your feelings don't matter. Your voice will only cause more problems. And over time, I think we internalize these messages. We start believing them, and eventually we just lose touch with the very self that desperately needed to build intimacy and experience it. Integrity calls us, however, to a different way. Integrity, it insists that we live in alignment and not performance. That our yes means yes, and our no means no. And that our politeness never really becomes a substitute for truth. And that when manners and meaning collide, meaning will win, because without meaning, all the civility in the world is nothing more than just noise, right? This is where courage comes in. Courage is really what allows us to interpret that endless cycle of polite disconnection. And it's what really empowers us to say, I disagree, even when the room falls silent. It's what pushes that desire in us to share. That hurt me, even when it risks that awkward moment, right? And it's what really invites us to say, this matters when others may prefer to stay quiet. Courage does not reject politeness. Courage redeems politeness, giving it this foundation and ballast of truth. I mean, think of those conversations that changed your life. Were they like merely polite, or were they real? Chances are those words that shaped you the most weren't the ones that kept the peace. Rather, they're the ones that carried meaning. Someone was willing to risk politeness for the sake of honesty. And in doing so, they gave you a gift that was far greater than manners could have ever given you. They gave you truth. And that's what intimacy thrives on, right? Intimacy is not built in the shallow end of small talk or constant courtesy. Intimacy is built when people risk being known, when they choose to speak what is real rather than what was easy. And without that risk, connection cannot deepen. It stalls at the very surface. And it's stuck in this cycle of polite disconnection. And for young men, I would say this is especially important. Too often we're taught that politeness is the same thing as respect. But respect without truth is empty, right? Real respect requires honesty. Real respect acknowledges both dignity and reality. And real respect risks discomfort in order to make that connection meaningful. And that's the kind of communication that integrity is calling us into. That's the kind of communication that can really transform our lives. Now, one of the clearest signs that politeness has taken over is especially when conversations feel safe but empty. See, we in essence walk away without conflict, but also without connection. It's the polite dinner table, for example, where no one dares bring up what actually matters. Or the polite workplace, where problems are whispered about in the hallways, but they're never addressed in meetings. Or it could be the polite friendship, where both people are staying agreeable while their unspoken frustrations are quietly piling up. Now, on the surface, it all seems fine, but underneath there's this growing gap, a widening disconnection that politeness cannot cover forever. Because politeness is not intimacy. Intimacy requires substance. And substance comes from risk. Risking disagreements, risking awkwardness, risking the discomfort of letting someone see the raw and unpolished truth of what you're thinking and feeling. And without that risk, relationships stay stuck in the shallow end. The danger of politeness is that it convinces us that we're doing the right thing. We're telling ourselves that we're keeping the peace and we're being respectful and we're sparing feelings. And sometimes that might be true. But too often, I think politeness is just fear in disguise. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of not being liked. And when fear is governing our communication, we may win approval, yes, but we lose authenticity. And again, this is where integrity demands something different. Integrity insists that our interactions actually reflect our values, not just our desire to be liked. And it calls us to speak truth, even when it's inconvenient. And it beckons us to risk temporary discomfort for the sake of deeper connection. Integrity, in essence, redeems politeness by grounding it in truth. But consider this paradox, though. See, when we move beyond mere politeness into honesty, relationships actually grow stronger. People may not always like what we say, but they learn to trust us. They know that when we smile, it's real. And when we affirm them, it's genuine. And when we say yes, it's not for a cover or a hidden no. Like it's a kind of consistency that builds the very respect that politeness had been trying to imitate all along. For many young men, this is, I think, such a crucial lesson. See, too often we've been told to equate maturity with stoicism, right? To equate respect with silence and to equate kindness with hiding our frustrations. But real maturity is not about swallowing everything. It's more so about learning to speak up in your truth, in a way that builds up instead of tearing down. And that's what integrity looks like in communication. I think of my own journey and how often I'd chosen politeness over being present. There were times when I walked away from a conversation knowing that I really hadn't been there, knowing that I'd been choosing to hide behind small talk or courtesy instead of offering something real. And every time I felt this hollowness afterwards. Because what I longed for wasn't really another layer of politeness. It was like what I was really longing for was intimacy. And intimacy only grows when meaning takes precedence over manners. Now, I think this is the calling that we all face, to risk being real, to let our words carry weight instead of just smoothness, to move beyond politeness into truth, even when the truth feels dangerous. Because while politeness may protect us from conflict, only honesty can actually connect us in love. Now, the question that we're left with is this. Do we want to be remembered as polite, or do we want to be remembered as those who are present? Politeness, like I said, may win applause in the moment, but presence is what builds legacies. Presence actually requires us to bring our full selves into every interaction. Not just the polished parts, but the whole of us. And that means that we're learning to speak with honesty, and we're listening with depth, and we're risking the messiness of truth just for the sake of intimacy. Politeness, however, is safe. Presence is costly. And yet only presence creates the kind of connections that endure. Because people don't remember the perfectly smooth conversations as much. What they remember is the moments when someone dared to be real. They remember the words that carried a risk because it was also carried with love. And they remember the honesty that invited them into something deeper than manners ever could. So when we allow politeness to replace the meaning, we are robbing ourselves and others around us from those moments. We're exchanging connection for performance, and we're settling for this version of ourselves that is agreeable but absent. And in doing so, we quietly are sabotaging the very thing we crave most, and that is to be known. This is why integrity really must guide us. Integrity reminds us that our words are meant to align with our hearts. And it insists that we refuse to trade honesty for approval. And it calls us to speak with both courage and compassion, weaving respect and truth into every interaction. Because true integrity doesn't discard politeness. It just places it in its proper place as a tool to serve meaning and not to replace it. See, at Uber Vintagers, this conviction is what fuels my mission. I want to call men into lives where integrity and intimacy are not optional add-ons, but more so they're the very center of our existence. It's like where men can risk presence over performance and honesty over these hollow manners and substance over surface. Where politeness is practiced, but never at the expense of meaning, right? Because only then can we actually build relationships that are whole and communities that are honest and lives that are actually marked by real connection. See, the truth is that politeness will always be easier. It costs less in the moment. It asks less courage, right? But in the long run, it leaves us empty. whereas meaning is harder and riskier and messier. But it's only a soil, though, where intimacy grows. And intimacy is what really makes life rich. It is what makes love possible and really what makes us human. So the next time, my dear listener, that you feel the pull to be merely polite, ask yourself, am I choosing manners over meaning? Or am I hiding behind the courtesy or politeness? Am I bringing my full self into this moment? Because the world doesn't need more empty politeness. It needs especially men of integrity who are willing to connect in truth. It needs men who dare to risk being real. Politeness or disconnection. This difference lies in whether we choose authenticity. So let's choose to be known. Let's choose to speak truth with respect. Let's choose meaning over manners. Because in the end, that is, I think, what makes our lives and our connections truly worthy of experiencing. Let me know how you experience this episode down in the comments.